All right. Thank you for being here with writer Amy Bernstein. I'm excited about this conversation because to me, you seem to be a multidisciplinary writer of fiction and nonfiction, romance, playwright, journalism, teacher, blogger. You got the Substack thing going on. And where I'd like to start is, if it's okay with you, is speech writing.
Oh, sure. I haven't gotten to talk about that in a long time. And it's funny when you go down that list, I really sound like a crazy person. I'm
Nice.
not. Just taking advantage of all the opportunities out there, I guess. And I enjoy writing in so many different formats. Yeah, for many years I was an executive speechwriter in government, and it's a really fascinating thing to put words in someone else's mouth. One of the myths about speech writing is people think, oh, well, you have to write in that person's voice so that you sound just like them. And actually, that's not true. What you need to do is shape a message in speech writing so that that person who's delivering the message is identifying totally with the words on the page, and then they make it their own. So it's a really complicated kind of multi-layered um, endeavor, and you are influenced by the kind of speaker that you're writing for, whether they prefer short sentences, and do they want just a few bullets on a note card, or do you have to blow it up to 16-point type so they can read it without their glasses, and there's a lot that goes into it.
Where do you start when you begin crafting it? Like if somebody says we need a speech about whatever, what's
Right.
your first
You
thing
you
that
you
you start
begin
with?
with the whatever. So most professional speech writing is basically you're writing to for an extremely specific purpose. You're writing to inform an audience on very specific points, and to almost always issue some type of a call to action to that audience, because you want them to do something, to believe something, to see something in a new light, or to take some type of action. So you really have to start with what are the two or three most important takeaways in the speech? What is the listener at the end of the day, if they just could tell you the main thing they took away, what would that be? So you have to be extremely clear about the message, and it's got to be very disciplined to kind of pare down so that everything you're saying is toward that message, toward that takeaway, and giving that call to action to the audience. It's pretty structured.
Do you think about the sound of their voice as far as how they speak in their cadence when you're kind of fitting the message to them after you get the basic down?
Yes, I very much do, and I think most speechwriters do. I was writing for, I'm not going to ever name any names, but I was writing for an executive for quite some time who he just wasn't. He wasn't a very fluid reader. Some people like you think of somebody like former President Obama, who's just really fluid with text on a page. He almost sounds like he's talking off the cuff, even if he's reading prepared remarks, and he's just good at that. But there are other folks who it's no slam on their intelligence. It's just they're just not good at it. They're not good at looking at that page and making those words seem just very rolling off the tongue. So when you're writing for someone who's not that good at reading, you want to make the sentences really short and clear. But you have to have enough variety in there so that you're not boring the listener. So it is a really interesting challenge.
Yeah, I kind of look at speeches like a shoe. It has to be the right style and comfort for the person, and then you need to be able to fit the speaker to that to the shoe.
I think that's a good metaphor for it, and it's true. And it's got to be a shoe that they would wear, in the sense that,
Yeah.
yes, I believe in what I'm saying, right? They have to believe what they're saying. And too, sometimes if there are unfamiliar words in a speech, or you have to put in a phonetic pronunciation, and so you have to think about all these things so that that speaker is can feel really confident in what they're picking up off the page. The other thing to remember is that in that really upper echelon of executive speech making, many people are too busy to do more than glance at their talking points, often just seconds ahead of when they have to deliver them. So you can't expect the person who's reading it to be as familiar with with it as you are, the person who crafted it. So you have to do it in such a way that they can absorb quickly and just kind of, get through it without a lot of rehearsal.
Yeah. I I like the base of speech writing, especially with your public speaking and then into journalism. One of the most valuable classes I've ever taken was a public speaking class, and it's been years ago. It's probably something that people could take periodically. You could take it every few years, especially if you were speaking a lot. Maybe it would help to polish the edges. But what is your experience with the public speaking end of things, given the speech writing?
Yes, that's an interesting question. Before I was a speechwriter, I did freelance for several years in public radio, which meant that I was still writing for the ear. When you listen to a story on public radio, there's sort of a certain rhythm to way the story goes, the way the reporter says something and then you hear a clip, and the reporter says something and you hear a clip, and it's kind of like a version of tennis that's got to be, calibrated with its own rhythm. So a lot of these different elements have played into my own experience. Also because as a playwright, I've done a lot of informal readings where I've had to read a part in a script, whether it was my own script or often that of a friend who's a playwright. So reading scripts out loud, whether around a table or for an audience. So there's that sort of performative element. Um, and I certainly have worked my way into a lot of teaching, both online and in person, where you always want to remember that um, you're there to deliver value to people. You're not there to just hear the sound of your own voice. And it's so important to be able to speak in a way that's inviting other people into a conversation. Um, I think that's another important element when you're sort of speaking with a group. I don't know whether I just answered remotely what you asked.
Yeah, it is. Like when I was putting together some ideas to talk about, I don't go specifically off questions, but more of an
Hmm.
outline.
Yeah.
And when I asked or first about the speech writing, it's like you hit everything that I wanted to talk about in your first statement. So it's pretty great. And then public speaking, you did the same thing. So it's what I would expect, I think, from a person that did public speaking and speech writing. So when you got into journalism, is that the first type of writing you started doing, or as far as professionally, or?
Professionally, yes, yes, yes. I started in journalism. There are many times where I kind of wish I'd stuck with it but when I see what's also happened to the field now, I mean, professional
Mm,
journalism is I don't want to say collapsing might be too strong a word, but there is a really, really scary um, cut back right now in journalism. So I'm really glad that I did have some years in that field, because journalism teaches you skills that you use really the rest of your life: how to research, how to research fairly, how to find different sources to get different points of view on an issue, so it's not just one-sided. That's so important, especially nowadays. So how to give different, voice to different sides of an issue, and how to just put down the most important stuff first, um, and how to write fairly quickly. Journalism really helps you just develop a practice of, because you've got a deadline constantly. Well, it's just got to be done. So you have to
mm.
learn how to kind of organize information and material pretty quickly. I'm really glad I had time to practice those skills. So I didn't even realize how much that would be helpful. It's very helpful.
Yeah, I see writing is helping you understand what you think because you have to put it down there. And then if you also put in the speech writing to it where you're saying it out loud, or journalism where you're reading it and going, okay, does this make sense? Then not only do you have to understand how you think, but how others are going to understand it. And to me, journalism and report writing are so similar. Coming from the law enforcement background of starting out my professional writing career, I think is reports where you're thinking, is the judge going to understand this? Is the Commonwealth's attorney, or is the jury going to understand it? How do you put in the things you're supposed to put in and leave out the other and make it as unbiased as possible? Because you're just trying to put the facts down there. It's a Joe Friday type of thing. But it's I'm glad I have that base of learning how to write, and I can see it as the scaffolding or framework, I guess more accurately, into writing anything is You have to understand what you're thinking about and then be able to get other people to understand it too.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you said, and you raised a really important kind of a idea, or it's become even a mantra that I use in a lot of the writers in my writing community, and I'm also a book coach. We use it a lot in book coaching, which is you really need to understand who your reader is. You need to
Mm.
understand who you're writing for, and that's just as true if you're writing a report for a courtroom judge as if you're writing a novel or you're writing a nonfiction book. You need to know who the reader is, and you need to think about that. And in journalism, the reader is basically the citizen who wants to be informed. So you always need to keep that, front of mind as well as to like what do they really need to know first, then second, then third, and what context does this reader need to understand this issue in all its complexity. So you're absolutely right about that. Yeah.
So, with all those things, the journalism background, the public speaking and speech writing, it seems the perfect base for writing novels, fiction or nonfiction, just because you have all the elements there, the storytelling, the rhetoric when you need it, that persuasion, just painting the picture as unmeddled as possible, and then also being able to guide the reader into whatever they want, into whatever you're trying to get them to see. Do you have times when you're writing fiction where you have all those things lined up, that message you're thinking that you're trying to get across, the moral of the story, and then someone else takes it a different way, or they say, I think that this character was doing this and it didn't occur to you at the time, but it makes sense? Have you had that happen before?
Well, you mean a reader gets something different from what you put on the page? Is that what you mean?
Right. Kind of to the
Yes.
point where the story takes on a life of its own, I guess.
Well, what does happen sometimes is that, particularly with fiction, not with nonfiction, a reader will draw a conclusion about a part of your story or about a character or about the character's fate or about a relationship that it never even occurred to you when you were writing it. And that's a very cool thing because it means that you created a believable enough world that somebody else could imagine things happening in that world that you didn't even imagine. And
Mm.
that is a really cool thing. But I will say that writing fiction is definitely its own beast. It's very hard to be prepared. I mean, I always tell people if you want to write fiction, you have to read a lot. Readers are writers. Writers are based on are people who read. And so that's kind of number one. I've come across writers or people who want to write and they don't read, and you just won't be a writer if you don't read. You have to understand how stories are told on the page. You have to understand how they're structured. You have to be able to analyze them. You have to see all the other tricks that writers are using, and you have to kind of be cognizant of that. But fiction is definitely one of the hardest things on the planet to do well. There's no question. It's very mysterious.
Where do you do most of your writing?
I sit at the end of my dining room table by choice. When I stopped working full time, I didn't want to be in an office anymore. I didn't want to feel that I didn't want that officey feeling. I wanted to feel like I was sort of, out in the world, doing it in my own way, at my own pace. Ironically, I've just ordered myself a new desk chair because I've been working from a dining room chair and it's not doing my back any favors. So I have to nod to the office setup a little bit, but for years now, it really is my laptop at the end of the dining room table. That's how I do it.
What type of programs do you use the most?
I am super basic. I mean, basically, I do everything in Microsoft Word. A lot of people like a lot of the different programs out there, like Scrivener, and I can't even think of all the names of them now. And that's fine. I'm just old-fashioned that way. All my notes, all my planning notes, all my drafts, everything's in Microsoft Word
Hmm.
for
Yeah, I
composition
found
purposes.
using Scrivener and those other ones, you get so lost in figuring out the way the program works and how many different things you can fill in, like character notes and all
Right.
these different outline forms, that you've written a lot, but you haven't written anything towards the final product. It's helping you think, but it's not getting you to the destination.
You know what? I tend to agree with everything you just said there, but I also have talked to so many writers who love it, And so I think it's whatever works for anyone. I think I already do a lot of things that Scrivener does. It's called the Microsoft Word file. It's called story notes. And
Mm.
it's like I will have character stories or character backstories. I'll have plot points. I'll have, story arcs. I'll ask questions. I do all that. I just do it in a plain old vanilla Word document, and then I consult it as I'm drafting in the draft itself. So that works for me.
Did you always use a program? Well, maybe they weren't. Microsoft wasn't always available, but when you first started writing, were you using, I guess, a typewriter back then, right? I mean, I
Um,
started with a
I, I
typewriter
I
and
am old enough that I
basically,
had to come through college on a typewriter. I mean, that's all there
yeah.
was. So all my college papers were on a typewriter, but I switched. I switched to the computer and the keyboard just as quickly as I could. And even my really early jobs, the few years out of college, most people don't remember this, but there were these dedicated machines, dedicated word processors. That's all they did. Like one was called
Mm,
K-Pro, one was called Wang,
mm.
and they were just these basically sort of computer boxes with keyboards that you could type. They weren't typewriters; they were more computerized than that, but they were also very limited in what they can do. And there was no such thing as the internet, so you weren't hooked up to anything outside of the box. But I was an early user of those things. So it just meant you could, I type really fast. It just meant you could type everything.
Yeah, I do remember the typewriter that had the little computer, like the little LED screen
The
on it,
the
and it had
high-end
like the
IBM Selectric.
sentence.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal, like, you could catch a mistake. There was this digital ribbon that came across. You could see the line you were typing. You could back up electronically before the mistake came out on the page, and that was a big advance.
Yeah, I remember thinking, "Wow, that's great." And then I also at the same time remember thinking, "It's got to be better than this. There has to be something better than this."
Yeah.
Because you're
Now,
still every now
honestly,
and then
I
with the
can't
whiteout.
write longhand at all. I mean, I can't write long. I can only think through my fingers on a keyboard. My brain like doesn't
Oh,
really work to with a pen in hand, not for anything significant, except a thank you note.
wow. Did you have your own shorthand when you were reporting or
That is a really great question. I had a reporter's notebook is small and narrow, so that you could just like scribble a little across a page and flip pages really quickly and not have something sort of bulky. Um, it was a bit of a wing and a prayer. I think I evolved a system where I could take notes that I could barely read, um,
mm,
in a real world situation, and then you just make the best of it. You have to be listening really hard so that you can capture verbatim or really accurately what's being said, but then you have to write so fast that you could just do your own shorthand. Yeah. Not real
yeah.
shorthand, just my own.
Yeah, with policing, that was if you're writing a summons and you're doing notes for it, or you're doing an investigation and doing notes, you developed a, I guess you would call it a shorthand, definitely nothing
Mhm.
official because it was
Mhm.
different. Nobody would know what it was unless you explained it to them. It was a lot of letters and
Right.
symbols and things,
Right.
but I guess that's what handwriting is letters and symbols.
Right.
But
Right.
the it's it did help. But then when towards the end of that, I got out of that in 2012,
Mhm.
that we were using computers, and that was a lot better because you could put your attention on other things because you could just type it out pretty quick, or it was already in there. You just
Yes.
scan something.
Yeah.
But mm,
I do think that, the technology has changed the way people write. I mean, when you think about the olden days where you didn't write anything without, a pad of paper and some type of a pen, or a
mm,
pencil, um, it just you had to compose a lot more slowly, you had to think about it more. What's happening now is people are whipping books out really fast and not even thinking about it that much. I think they should think about it more, but because you can just type those words and there it is. It's changed the way a lot of people write.
I do remember a technology of a pen that had a light on the end of it. So at night, if you thought about something and you had to write it down because you didn't want to forget it, you instead of turning the light on, you could just click your pen on and write it and then go back to sleep.
Oh,
And that
that's
was
cool. I could
nice.
use that. I
Yeah.
don't have one of those.
How often do you take notes and write things during the day that's not you're not sitting down writing, but just a thought occurs and you have to capture that?
Well, Well, I keep idea files on my computer, and this literally called ideas for different reasons. Like for my subs, I have an ideas file for my Substack newsletter, and I have an ideas file for my fiction, for example. And when on those rare occasions when some lightning tends to strike, I will open that up and make sure I put some notes in. But more often than not, I'm already working on something, and so I might already have a planning file for that project. So notes will go into that. I have two things open on my desk this morning. One is a draft of something. The other is the planning file for that thing. And so I'll kind of toggle back and forth between those. But I do dip into the ideas files now and again.
Hmm. Yeah, it's one of those things where I think everybody's got those files. All writers have those files of different things that when they die, timely or otherwise, that no one will ever go back and look at. That there should
I
be
hope
some
not.
sort of there should be some sort of thing on it where you can set it to where it publishes its own book, so you have a book of ideas of things to write about, or it gets handed down to someone so they can continue the work, or it gets destroyed because you don't want anybody to see it. I mean, those are
Yeah,
the three different
nobody
files
wants
I could think of.
nobody wants the ideas in my idea file. I'm pretty sure about that. So not to worry.
Okay. What when you sit down to write during a day, do you have a specific time of day that you do it and try to keep to a schedule? Or when you're
I don't
writing a book,
Yeah,
what do you do?
I don't write to a schedule. I definitely am fresher in the morning. But depending on what else I have many different things going on in any given week. Um, I try to do some writing in the morning. I don't necessarily creative writing, original writing. I often have, I've got newsletter deadlines. I have to prep for teaching and coaching. I had to spend several hours yesterday making a PowerPoint for a workshop I'm teaching tomorrow. So it's sort of like a little bit catch as catch can. I try to be fairly consistent. If I'm working on something, I try to touch it a little bit every day, but it's not a set time. But for me, the first half of the day, I'm better than the second half. I'm not a night owl kind of person. If I'm very far along in, say, a fiction project, I may take a fresh look at it in the evening, if there's something I think I can really do, based on maybe the day's work, but I don't tend to be terribly creative at night. I tend to be tired.
Hmm. When you do write, do you have like a word count you're going for, or a specific amount of time, or is it just when the amount of time you had, as you said before?
I am not a word count person. I'm very aware with like what they call NaNoWriMo, the November, National November,
Hmm.
Writing Month. Many people are motivated by the word count idea. They want to set a goal daily, weekly, monthly. That doesn't work for me. So again, in writing, we're all different. That doesn't work for me because my emphasis is always on quality, not quantity. And I um, I often will try to write a single scene, and my scenes can vary. A scene can be short or can be fairly long, and I can't even give you a word count. I mean, a scene can be just a couple hundred words. But for me, it's about what's happening in the story, what needs to happen next, what's the flow, what is this, what is the, what's going on with the characters, what's the story arc, where am I in the story as a whole. For me, it's all much more about the structure and the integrity of the story than it is about how many words. And so for me, I'm going to be geared more toward the scene than toward number of words. So I don't set things like, if I set anything, it's like, let me see if I can write this scene today. That'll be my goal.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. I think when I started, I was thinking more of word count, and that helps if you're trying to get things done to where you feel like you've accomplished something. Like, do you feel like a writer if you write 3,000 words a day? Do you feel like a writer if you write 300? And I've gotten to the point now where I would trade 3,000 words for a good line. 3,000 words of just going at it versus, oh, that's a good one. That is not going to need any editing. That's going to go in just like it is. Like, you see that every now and then.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think that I can see the value in trying to write or write a lot on a daily or weekly basis is a good way to simply build up the muscles of a writing
Mm.
practice. But there's also what I think of as good writing hygiene. And the hygiene aspect is really thinking about your ideas and structure and quality and who's the reader and what are you really trying to do here, and are the pieces fitting together, and does it make sense, and does it flow, and do you see the whole? I mean, the writing hygiene is about making it good. The
Mm.
writing practice maybe starts with, well, let me just get in the habit of literally producing. But at the end of the day, if what you produced isn't good, or structural, doesn't have structural integrity, or isn't holding together, you have to ask what you've really accomplished. So I think it's a kind of a tricky thing.
Yeah, it makes me think about the Bruce Lee quote, form is meant to be forgotten. The idea that you practice all these things and then once you start doing it, you find your own way of doing it. I like
Very
that.
true. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
With romance writing, how do you approach that versus other type? Is there a formula you're going for, or do you know that it's going to be a romance when you start, or does it just work out that way and then you go, oh, this is obviously
Well,
a
I
romance?
I think you need to I think you need to know. So, for example, I've written a mystery thriller and I've written a romance. And so what you have to do is, when you're going to write into a specific genre, is you have to recognize the expectations and what we call the tropes of that genre. What does the reader expect to get from that kind of a book? Because they're going to be angry with you, or they're not going to finish it, or they're not going to like it if you don't deliver on certain things. So, like in a mystery thriller, there's got to be probably a dead body and people trying to find a killer and things of this nature. You have to build in some basic things, right? And then you can kind of go wild and crazy around that. And somebody who's trying to solve a murder, for example, when you're writing a romance, you absolutely need to have a situation where there's at a minimum a pair of, whether they're people or magical beings, it doesn't matter, because you can have fantasy romance or whatever, who are going to somehow find their way to one another and and fall in love. Um, and so there's lots of ways of playing with that, but you have to deliver what the romance reader expects at the end of the day, which is, we call it, there's two ways of ending a romance. One is happily ever after, and one is happily for now. And it's got kind of has to be one or the other.
Okay. Yeah, that goes back to the what you were talking about earlier of you have to know your reader, know your
Right,
audience.
right.
How much time do you put into research before you write a story versus while you're writing it? Do you get into like a mystery thriller and then think, well, I need to find out about this blood splatter stuff, or do you how
Yeah,
much do
and
you look
you're
into?
right, right. And for me, it's not my book. It's not too gory, so it's not blood splatter. But I totally take your point. I I do a because I come out of this journalism nonfiction writing background. I do a lot of research for all my books. Even my paranormal romance is like heavily researched because there's a lot of archaeology in it. I had a tremendously fun time doing a lot of real archaeological research that I brought into the story and then blending it with stuff I made up. But the point is, you can't always tell, but you created a believable world for the reader, so that the real stuff is going to be as believable as what you made up. So I love the research. I love doing research, and I will often literally be in the middle of writing a scene. I'll go like, "Oh wait, I need to understand how this thing functions, or what this thing looks like." Like, for example, I was in the middle of a scene in the romance book, and I knew they had to use some kind of a metal detector. And I know what those things kind of look like if you're walking around on a beach, but don't have a clue as to how it actually works. So I had to stop. I had to just stop everything and figure out, how does a metal detector work? And I had to figure out some things about, if you're out in a motorboat, and you want to throw like a metal cage over the side, that's got like heavy chain links, and like I had to understand a lot about these dynamics. So I will stop and research, and when I feel that, here's the thing, at the end of the day, you need to paint a picture in the reader's mind. If that picture's not clear in your mind as the reader won't get it. So until I can picture, this is what's happening right here in the scene, this is what it looks like, smells like, feels like, if I can picture that and describe it, then the reader will be there too.
Is that how you approach your writing your scenes? Is you have that picture in your mind's eye and then you try to explain just enough to where someone else can construct a similar one? Or are you trying to get them to do exactly what you see?
I think it's a combination. I think I'm much more driven by trying to be very present for the character's emotion because you want to make sure the reader is feeling what the character's feeling. Um, and whether that's positive or negative. So I'm very grounded in that. But around that, I'm trying to build a scene so that it's like the reader's in the room or cinematic, right? You want it to be cinematic in the sense that they can see it unfolding. That they can
Mm.
see where they are in the room. They know if the character's standing or sitting. They know if that character is agitated. You want to give them just enough without overwriting it so that the reader can sort of participate in the scene.
Hmm. What do you think the biggest advantage of writing fiction over nonfiction is?
I don't think there are any. I don't think there are any advantages. Fiction is a very difficult field. It's a difficult market right now. There is the joy, of course, of shaping your imagination to a story, and that's a wonderful journey to go on. Um, but in the commercial publishing world, let's talk about that for a moment. Fiction and nonfiction are both up against lots of gatekeepers in the form of literary agents, in the form of publishers who are often increasingly risk averse about what they publish because their margins are pretty thin. Publishing has gotten expensive. Literally, paper has gotten expensive, and so um, for the writer, you have to go with this for the passion that's in you to do the thing. Um, but in terms of the marketplaces, it's difficult and challenging, and so you have to be ready to anticipate that. And I realize that's sort of like a sideways way of getting at what you asked, but it's just sort of true. These are difficult marketplaces, and you have to really, really, really want to do this work.
Yeah. I like fiction because anything can happen. And I like nonfiction because you already know what happened. Like you're researching it.
Well,
So,
yes and no. I mean, memoir is also nonfiction. Memoir is very big now, where there's a curated version of somebody's life, right? It's not actually the way life happened. It's the way you're telling the story of the life. And if it's written well, the reader actually doesn't know what you're invested in it like fiction. You want to know what's
yeah.
going to happen because you may not know. Um, with fiction, I agree. I mean, anything can happen, but at the end of the day, when you're writing fiction, when you're crafting it, you have to be really clear about why what is happening is happening. So a lot of choices get closed off to you in the course of writing a novel because the reader has to find that world believable. They have to find the actions believable. They have to find sort of the whole trajectory of the plot and how the protagonist changes from beginning to end. I mean, there's a lot of choices that you have to make and choices that you have to abandon. So
Mm.
anything goes sort of kind of, but then within that world, you have to make decisions.
Yeah. You have to stay true to the world. And then
Yes.
if for some reason you're doing something that's different, you have to be able to explain it somehow. One of the great examples of that, I think, is there's a Star Wars movie. I think it's Force Awakens. I can't remember which one it is. It's the last one I've seen because it started to get too ridiculous. But they were out in space and they were going for what felt like a World War II type of vibe with the
Mhm.
pilots and things. And then they started dropping bombs in space. And I was like, there's no explanation on how this is going to work. We just need a little something, just a little something about how you can't use a laser because of the gravity of the planet that you're around. You have to use a bomb and it pulls it towards the planet. Give me something rather than just, I mean, it's a cool picture, but it's a World War II on Earth thing. It's not a galaxy long time ago, far, far away.
I
So
and
it's,
I love that because then they kinda lose you. That happens in books too, right? When the world
mm,
building suddenly breaks the trust with the reader because it's just not believable, they break the rules and,
mm,
it's like, no one can hear you in space, so don't expect to be, shouting. It's not happening. But you're right, like, in gravity, you can't drop a bomb in outer space. It's I could you just this is like, "Okay, I'm done. This doesn't work." Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
that's a hard thing, that and you have to be really true to that for sure.
Yeah. I saw there's a new Quiet Place edition coming out.
I saw that
And
too.
I'm thinking, what if you're that sensitive to sound, you have to go through some serious training to get dropped onto a planet with so many sounds of just wind through the leaves and then insects and everything else. And it's that would make more sense to me if they were creatures that lived in space, so they weren't used to hearing a lot of things and they're just aggravated by the sound, and that's why they attack everything. But I mean, I guess they could explain it a little more. Maybe they will in the next one. But
Right. That's one of my favorite phrases is the willing suspension of disbelief. I mean, you have to make me not believe in the regular rules of the world because you've convinced me that these other rules are just as real, and
yeah,
I'm willing to go there. I mean, when you watch a movie like Mars with Matt Damon, which is based on a really great book, it's that notion of I totally believe that this guy is stranded alone on Mars, and I actually totally believe he's going to make it. Like you have to,
yeah,
because they make such a believable world. I love that movie.
yeah. I like that. I felt like they they saw Interstellar, and then they're like, "Hey, we got to get him in a spacesuit again. Let's put him on Mars. Find a script for that." With playwriting or a dramatist, I found out that that's another name for playwright. That's interesting. What got you interested in doing that?
Well, when I was deciding several years ago that I needed to start writing creatively, not just for work, on the
Mm.
in the nonfiction world, which is what paid me, um, I first I wrote a little novel just to prove to myself, okay, I really needed to know I can do this. I know I can do this. And then I did that thing and I just, self-published it. This was a long time ago. And then I don't remember how I stumbled on it, but I decided I was really interested in writing plays, as a way of understanding how to write for theater. And I was just drawn to that. I had done a lot of drama as a kid, and I think that interest came back. So I just, signed up with a group of local playwrights, and I took a class and just started doing it. And I really loved it. I really loved it. The thing about playwriting is it's an intensely collaborative medium. I mean, you write by yourself, but then your play doesn't exist without actors and a director and people doing the scene work or sound. And so it really takes a village to put on a play, and that's a very difficult kind of different and often difficult road to follow to get all these people to do your work. So it's an interesting challenge, interesting experience. One thing I will say is that the great thing about writing plays is it really helps you as a novelist to write dialogue, because a play is almost all dialogue. And having been a speechwriter before that, I was very sensitive to dialogue. I didn't know I was setting up all these patterns in my life, but that just sort of
I
came out
know
that way. So I was
it's
like, oh, I've been a
perfect.
speechwriter. No wonder I'm going to write plays. And oh, I also did public radio. It's like I know how to write for the voice. And then, I get around to more novel writing, and like I think I'm very sensitive to dialogue because I understand the dialogue really matters. I read too many novels by newer writers who they haven't thought about what the characters are just talking and saying things that don't need to be said. Like dialogue needs to be really, really intentional and purposeful. It should be revealing something that's needed in that scene, something that's that the character is really kind of showing you who they are. I mean, it has to matter. You can't just sit there and talk about the weather. That's not dialogue in a novel. So it was an interesting progression for me. Yeah.
When you write, like physically put it down, how do you format it? Are you formatting it more like a screenplay where it's the dialogue is in the middle and it has the person's name above it, or
Do you
are
mean
you
how you write
writing
a
it
do you
like
mean how do you write a play? Is that what you're
yeah?
a
Are you
play?
writing it like you'd read in a textbook, like you're reading
No,
Julius
no,
Caesar, and it
plays
has
have a playwriting contemporary playwriting, because it's changed over the years, has a very, very specific format. The character name is usually capitalized, centered, and underlined, and their dialogue comes directly beneath that, centered. Stage directions are always flush to the right. So there's a very specific way of doing this. There's just specific ways of handling sort of interior, a little bit of interior stage directions. Like, in other words, he waves at her, like you'd handle that a certain way, as opposed to like scene directions, where on the right you're going to say a table and three chairs. There's a water pitcher in the middle. Um, the room is dark. Like you put
Hmm.
all that stage direction stuff's going to go on the right. So there's a very specific accepted way of formatting a play.
It sounds like it's more like a screenplay versus what you would read in high school if you're
Yeah,
open
more
up a
like that, but
textbook and read.
screenplays are even more complicated because screenplays get you into interior, exterior, and things of that
Mhm.
nature, and sometimes there's suggested camera angles. I find that I'm not wired. I've tried, dabbled. I'm not wired to write for the screen because I don't want to put in, uh, there's a lot of stuff that goes into a screenplay that takes me out of the story because
Mm.
there's so much you're having to create a visual world, and I want to be in the world of the text. Just a text-based person. But of course,
Hmm.
there are so many brilliant films where what the text obviously is also brilliant. I just don't, that marriage doesn't line up for me in my brain.
Yeah, screenwriting to me is feels more like writing an instruction booklet for something.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah,
very maybe.
I keep falling away from, I want to tell a story here, and like now I have to talk about, oh, we're back to interior shot and then a quick cut to like this and a quick close up to that. Like even though you're not supposed to over prescribe in a screenplay because that's the director's decision, you still have to give
Mhm.
indications of what you're seeing unfold. Yeah.
Yeah, it's suggestions, and then
Yes.
I didn't realize how much the actor played part in it. Like, it's what's the actor, how are they going to say these lines or move in the scene? It's you're writing suggestions for a director and then words for an actor to figure it out on their own.
Right.
So I can see why it matters when you get a bad movie versus a good movie.
Yeah.
It's the acting.
Yeah. It's a lot of things. Yeah.
Do you have a lot of experience with writing groups, or do you use, um, like, for developing your ideas, do you also have beta readers that you'd send things out to
hmm
before they were published just to make sure it's tracking?
So I belong to a couple of different writing communities for different purposes, but not so much for what would you think of as the standard critique group. I don't. I have mixed feelings about that. I know there are many writers that count on that because that is their writing community, but a lot of critiques groups can also end up sometimes doing more harm than good for a writer because people get to the point where they feel their only job is to pick apart anything you've done. Whereas I think writers need, it's not that we don't need to be told the truth about things, but we need a tremendous amount of encouragement and support to keep going. And that's really important to me. And so I'm in groups that do that. I have used beta readers really selectively for completed manuscripts, but not a lot. And uh, I mean, these are things that are all open to, subjective, usage. I love my writing communities, and because I belong to more than one, because we remember that we're kind of in this together, that we're all taking these creative risks and sort of struggling with, with where we are in our process or our project, and I find that very inspiring, knowing that there are all those people out there doing kind of what you're doing in their own way, and we do support one another's work and so forth. But uh, I don't do the traditional critique group where someone is going to give me feedback on pages.
Have you done, collaborative writing on a book, not just on a play or anything like that where you have other people's inputs, but on a, like, co-written, novel? Have you done that before?
I should never say never, but I will just say that is never going to happen in my lifetime. No, no, no. I mean, it's one thing. It's one thing to contribute to an anthology, which is different because it's still your work alongside other work. But no, I have no interest in, and I don't think that I would. I don't have any interest in writing collaboratively the way you're articulating it. I really want to just write my own stuff.
Hmm. I found that the collaborative writing, there are things about it I really liked.
Uh huh.
But you have to give up so much control over it, and
Yes.
you also the other person has to do the same thing, so you end up with a blend and not just one person calling the shots and the other person doing the work or trying to fill in. Like,
Right.
it helps if the story can go anywhere. If it's not a set, this is what's going to happen, this is my vision for it, now let's write it together. If you talk about it together and say, what do you think about this, how about that, and then you mix all that up, then maybe that's different. But you definitely have to let go
Right.
and be willing to say, here's a chapter I think is the next thing that happened, and then the other person going, no, that's not what happened, and you go, oh, okay.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a very, very different mindset. It's a different approach to creative writing, and it works obviously wonderfully for some people. I mean, even in the screenwriting world, there have been really famous screenwriting teams, a lot of husband and wife teams where they wrote that, they
Mm.
did it together, and that's great. I'm not wired that way. I mean, I'm a very collaborative person, in many endeavors in my life, but when it comes to writing, my work is my work. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, the collaborative made me, if you ever get to the point where you're like, I just don't feel like writing right now, well, then maybe you just don't have anything to say. But also, if you did a little collaborative writing, and then I think it would make you go, this is okay. Now I want to write on my own.
It could definitely inspire somebody that direction. I could see that
Yeah.
for sure. Is that what happened to you?
Uh, I was writing regularly, and then we did the collaborative stuff, and I was working on other things while we were doing it. But I thought it was pretty exciting. I liked it, and you do have to give up a lot of control, and it did make me look forward to working on my own stuff too, where
That's
you could
great.
just say, this is what's
Right.
going to happen, and
That
that's how
is a
it's going.
great outcome. That's a wonderful outcome. The opposite of that is like, I'm never writing with anyone else again, and I'm never showing anybody else my work again. Like, you could go the other way, right? But you could lose a
Yeah.
friend, right? No, but I think it's great when it helped you. It helped ignite your own creative engine and energy, and I think that's a wonderful, wonderful way to think about it.
Do you get work from that other people are working on, and I guess it's before the beta reading, it's while you're doing it, to where you have to create some sort of accountability, and you tell somebody you're working on a story and it's something they're interested in, and they go, well, I'd like to read that, or they're willing to read it while you're writing it. That doesn't mean you send them the first draft, but maybe the third or fourth of a thing that you're still progressing on, and just see what they think about. Have you
No,
either given
no,
somebody that or
yeah,
done that for
yeah.
someone?
And again, for many writers, this is part of their process, and that's wonderful. It doesn't work for me because I need to keep working on something until I've made it as good as I possibly can.
Mm.
And then for me, it needs to be in the hands of an editor or a publisher. Um, if it's not gonna, I don't have an agent. If it's not gonna, be in the hands of an agent, but I don't share, except I shouldn't say that I don't. There are very specific circumstances, like I'm working with somebody right now, um, who's helping me figure out a path to which agents to submit something to. So she had to read the whole manuscript of the book to help me figure out what agents should I submit to. But that's rare for me. But somebody can't help you like that unless you're going to share the work. So it's for me. It's I don't do it that much.
Hmm.
And
What's your
that might be a flaw. I mean, I'm not perfect.
I always found it exciting if you knew somebody was looking forward to reading it, and hopefully, I mean, it made you want to finish, and made you want to work on it even
Hmm.
more, so it's
Hmm.
not just something that you're going to write and then set aside and never look at again. And it creates that accountability, I found, but also it made me see how important it was when you do that for somebody else. If they say, I have this thing I'd like you to look at, and then you have to take it serious. Like you have to really put some thought into it. It's kind of like grading a paper. Not that you're grading it for any purpose like that,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
that you have to think about it. And I usually used different color pens when I go over it, and I print it out rather than
Hmm.
just doing it on the
Hmm.
computer, because I feel like I can't work with it as well. And
Hmm.
then I'll have different pens for, like, if there's a grammar thing, I'll do the classic red. but there's very few of that with me because I'm not that great with spelling and all. So, if there's a lot of red on something that I was looking at, that it's really bad because I'm not going to catch it otherwise. So there's a lot of programs you should put it through before you send it to people. But I have that, and then I have like the comments of just as a reader where you're like, oh, that's exciting. I like this line, or this action's pretty good, or she better not go in there.
Mm-hmm.
Those type of
Mm-hmm.
things.
Mm-hmm.
And I I like getting that back from people. So when I get that from someone, it's like, man, I need to get this out and back to them as soon as I can,
Mm-hmm.
because I know when I send it, as soon as I send it to them, I think, I wonder if they're reading it now. I wonder when I'm going to get it back. But
Mm-hmm.
then you have to go on and do something else. It's kind of like back in the day when you ordered something from a cereal box and it took 8 weeks to get there instead of your Amazon 2-day shipping now. So you have to
Well,
develop a little more patience.
I think those writers who come to you, they're lucky that they get that much of your attention. I think that's wonderful. I do work with a lot of other writers' material. Partly, I do part of that professionally as a book coach. I'm trained to do it, and sometimes I just do it as a favor for friends. And one of the things that we talk about is focusing on the what we call the higher order concerns. Instead of like not gonna focus on grammar and stuff like that. I'm gonna look at structure and the arc of the story, and is it working, and is the world believable, and am I drawn in as a reader, and am I engaged, and do I feel sympathy or whatever for the protagonist. I'm going to be looking at these kind of big picture things. If I'm looking at fiction, I work with a lot of nonfiction writers, and there we're looking at other things, like what is the central argument, what's the real theme of the book, what's the evidence that you've marshaled to support it, how does it flow, what's the journey that the reader's being taken on, what do they know at the end that they didn't know at the beginning. So we're looking at a lot of those things. And I mean, I love that work. I love doing that. I love helping another writer achieve their own clarity.
Is that the teaching and coaching that you do, is writing on that scale?
I teach a lot of work. I teach a lot of courses on related to the craft of writing fiction, many different aspects. But my book coaching practice, which is an actual business, is working with clients in the nonfiction space specifically, who are looking to often go from a raw idea to a polished book proposal that they perhaps want to shop into the marketplace. Or I may be working with someone on a memoir or on something they want to self-publish. So that's kind of a range of things. And that's a wonderfully rewarding work to help those other novelists. So I do this in a couple of different ways.
Okay. With your publishing experience, then with self-publishing and then traditional publishing, what what do you like the best? Which one do you like the best?
I don't plan to self-publish anymore. I wanted to see what that felt like. And with self-publishing, the issue is I tend to write books that often cross genres and fall between genres. So some of my work is hard to categorize. Um, and if you self-publish, you have to make some choices, but you don't have to be in quite as tight a box as a traditional publisher might put you in. But the thing about self-publishing is, it falls to the author to do absolutely everything, right?
Mm.
Cover art, and then all the marketing. In traditional publishing, the publisher picks up a lot of that for you, giving you the cover art. I have a book coming out in the fall that's beautifully illustrated. All this is done by the publisher, and they at least will do some marketing for you. Increasingly, authors have to do a lot of their own, but if you're traditionally published, you don't have to do it all. And I only want to be traditionally published from this point forward. But it's interesting having experienced both. It really is. You just have to be prepared to market really, really, really aggressively, no matter how you're published, but especially if you're indie published.
What are the marketing things you do most often for your own work?
Well, it's different for every writer. So I believe in trying to sell books directly on social media rarely works. In other words, if you go on there, whatever it is, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and you go, hey, I wrote this book. It's about X. You'll love it. Buy it. That doesn't work. I don't do
Mm.
anything like that. I do a tremendous amount of content. sharing and engagement on all the platforms where, I mean, I have a series on TikTok called Today in Fiction, where I'm usually sharing experiences and resources and tips. And once in a while, once in a blue moon, I'll remind people that I have a book out coming out, or I'll remind them to go to my website and sign up for something. But it's mostly about engagement and content sharing. That's the space that I'm comfortable in. I don't want to be in the direct sales business. That's not why I write. And that generally doesn't work so well. And my newsletter on Substack, Doubt Monster, um, is all about lots of content that I think is pretty thoughtful and interesting to get people to read about and think about. It's for creative people wrestling with self-doubt, and that is a tie-in to my book that's coming out. But you can read the newsletter and not know that. I'm not selling my book in the newsletter, but I'm sharing content to build community, and hopefully those people will want to buy it. So that's the way I like to go.
How'd you get started with Substack?
I've been writing on Medium for years, which is a similar platform in intent. They're not structured quite the same way. And so I love writing essays. Some are researched essays, some are more personal reflections. I just love that form of writing. Again, the journalism background really helps.
Mm.
And I'm writing primarily now on Substack, which I just find the platform more congenial. I find the quality of the work very high. I feel like I'm in the middle of hundreds of really exceptionally good writers and content creators. So I'm happy. It's funny because during this very conversation, my scheduled newsletter I saw the email come out. It just came out. So my weekly newsletter, it's just out there now.
Okay. So then the platform of Substack itself is different from your blogging
Yes,
platforms
it's
then.
different. It's different because Substack I think of the way I say it to people who haven't been on these things. Imagine walking into a store that's got almost every magazine in the world on the racks. And so you could browse all these magazines on every topic you could imagine and find the articles that you really like. And then you'll buy that magazine. That's not a perfect analogy, but it's a similar way of thinking about all these people who publish on Medium. It's aligned with publications that cater to people's interests. On Substack, it's more aligned to the individual writer who writes on a certain topic that they're an expert on or that they're interested in. And so you can pick and choose who to follow based on your own interests and what you want to know or learn, or what environment you want to be in. And it can be technical, it can be social, it can be health and wellness, it can be the arts, it can be movies, it can be pop culture. It's like almost anything that you want to go look for is there.
Okay. It's a good explanation. You need to get on the Substack marketing team. Like they should contact you.
I think they're doing all right. I hope so.
What keeps you writing?
Uh, I just have to. It's definitely it's an inner need. It's how I make sense of the world. It's how I explain the world to myself. It's how I think. I think by writing. And I write as a result of thinking. It's just really, really important to me in all the different forms. I just need to do it. I just really need to. Like, there's nothing else that I would rather do with my time.
Where do you think that drive comes from?
I think you're born with it. I think it's temperament. I do. I mean, you can dance around the margins and learn how to write better, and you can learn some techniques, and you can practice a lot, you can get better. But at the end of the day, you either have an inner drive to write, or you don't.
Hmm. Where do you how do you reach for writing? Like when you're thinking about what to write and wherever the ideas come from, are there ways that you, through either things you just motions you normally go through, like sitting down at the table, or how do you get into the mood for writing, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I often have to force it. I mean, there's like jokes about like if you sat around waiting for inspiration, you'd never write. Um, I basically sit there. I stare at the screen. I stare at the last thing I wrote. I stare at the notes. I look off into space. I think, and then I try and write something. You know, that, I mean, that's it. It's not really magical. Um, you know, and putting out a weekly newsletter, you know, you just stare at that screen. You're like, what am I writing about this week? You know, you just dig it up. You just dig it up. I look for I look for quotes that jump out at me, things that I read during the week that jump out at me, things people say. I'm constantly trying to kind of be mindful of what might spark an idea, but that's that's it.
If somebody asked you now, what do you do, like as far as profession goes, what would your answer be for that?
Then I'm a writer and a book coach. That'd be the boil down.
Is that what takes up most of your time?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Which, you know, that includes the teaching, which is all part of it. Somehow it's all on the spectrum. Yeah.
What's the best way for people to follow your work or to just see what you're doing?
Well, my author website is where I send everyone, and they can learn more about the book coaching from there. I have a separate book coaching website. So it's just amywrites.live, AMYWRITES.live. And you can find out about my books. You can find out about some of my upcoming courses, and you can certainly find out about Wrangling the Doubt Monster, Inspiring Fears, Finding Inspiration. Excuse me, Fighting Fears. I said that wrong. Wrangling the Doubt Monster, Fighting Fears, Finding Inspiration. That is the name of the book. It's for every creative person who is wrestling with self-doubt. It's meant to inspire and encourage. That book's coming out in the fall, and you can learn more about it on the website.
Okay. And I'll put those links in the show notes as well.
Great.
I have some other ones too. I think your link tree is in there.
Yeah,
and
that's good. That
then,
gets everything. Yeah.
your Amazon authors page, which I really like that feature where you can follow a writer and then you get the notifications when new things come out. I like that. Thank you for having the conversation today. Is there anything that you like to talk about that we didn't cover?
You know, the only thing you didn't ask me is what I had for breakfast. This was a really, really deep conversation, and I really, really appreciate it. Really deep
All right,
conversation
good.
about writing and all the things around that.
That's high praise. I think the do we say pedigree? The pedigree or the experience of the way your writing career has developed and was constructed is just I think it's perfect to go from the journalism, speech writing, public speaking into playwright because it's all about character, it's all about
Right.
story, and then into the nonfiction and fiction. It's pretty great.
I didn't
So
do it on
think
purpose. It just happened that way.
I know that's life. That's life. That's how
That's
it
life.
works. It just
That's
works
life.
out.
That's life.
I really appreciate your conversation though. I will let's push the wrong button. Let's talk on the other side of this musical exit if that's okay with you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.